Welcome everyone on this sunny March afternoon. Thank you so much for joining our session today, which is on community ownership as part of the place-based peer learning programme. I'm Kate Parkin, Senior Officer on the Let's Create Peer Learning programme, and we're joined today by a number of speakers. We're thrilled that we can be joined by speakers from both backgrounds in support, in delivering and implementing kind of change in kind of private purchase and asset transfer of community venues. For the purposes of audio describing, I am a white woman with brown hair, a yellow jumper and a red necklace, so you should be able to spot me. And I'll be here throughout the session. The session today is 2 hours, and we have a break at 3 o'clock for about 10 minutes. And we're going to have case studies in the afternoon after that, followed by some questions. And we should be finished by 4. I'm just going to say that. So today we'll be looking at community ownership from asset transfer to private purchase. And we're thrilled to be joined by Debbie Lamb, Development Manager from Locality UK, who'll be talking about what is community ownership. Then we are going to hear from George, ODA, Impact Officer from Plunkett Foundation, who'll be talking about how to get the business plan right, the support available and steps in setting up private purchase and community shareholding. Then we're going to speak and hear from Matthew Oatridge, Chief Operating Officer from Music Venue Properties, who'll be sharing top tips on community shareholding. And after the break, we'll hear from Chris Clark, who is a trustee of Friends of Jesmond Library, to talk about their building and their asset transfer of the building. And then we're joined by Lenny Watson, Director of the Sister Midnight Project in Lewisham. So we're going from Newcastle, Jesmond Library, to Lewisham in London to talk about a music venue and the steps and the kind of journey so far into purchasing their building. We hope it's very useful, and we'd welcome questions. If we can have them at the end, that'd be brilliant. After we've heard from all the speakers. The session today is recorded, so please feel free to listen afterwards or send it on to colleagues, contacts who you think might be useful. And it will also be on our Hivebright, so that's our Let's Create website, to be accessed with additional resources to the slides from today. We hope you enjoy the session. And without further ado, I will introduce, I'm just going to spotlight Debbie from Locality UK. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie Lamb from Locality. I've had about 20 years experience of working on community asset ownership, working one-to-one with organisations seeking to acquire and refurbish assets. And that's a huge variety of different kinds of land and buildings. So theatres, museums, community centres, heritage buildings, sports centres, community gardens, loads. Locality's the national network for community-led organisations. We believe in the power of community to transform lives and build a fairer society. Locality's been involved in campaigning around community asset transfer since the 1990s. In the 2000s, we campaigned a lot about community asset transfer. That's the transfer of land and buildings from local authorities to community organisations. That really took off towards the end of the noughties, when we had the financial crisis, and many local authorities were faced with having buildings which were much loved by local people and delivered services which were really important, but they couldn't afford to maintain. So they started to work with community organisations to try and keep those buildings available and active. Since then, we've moved on to having a campaign around Save Our Spaces, looking at public buildings which are being sold off or are underused, and seeing if there are better ways in which they could be utilised for public benefit. We led a consortium delivering support around the Community Ownership Fund. One of our partners was Plunkett, who will be speaking, George will be speaking later. What I'm basically going to talk about is very briefly about acquiring assets, how to get started, about raising funding, about managing an asset, and then a little bit about the resources that are available. I hope you excuse me when I use as an overall term community organisation. It means community organisation, voluntary organisation, community arts organisation. But we'd be here forever if I said all of that every time. So, shall we move on to how organisations can acquire assets? There are two fairly general ways in which people do this. That's community asset transfer or community right to buy. I'm going to start off with community asset transfer. As I said, this is usually from a local authority, but could actually be from any statutory body. It's at a discount based on the social value of what the community organisation will provide in that building. It's usually on a long lease rather than a transfer of a freehold. What's important to know is that community asset transfer is not set out in law. So it's a negotiation with a particular local authority. Some local authorities don't do it at all, and there's no way to force them into it. If you've got your eyes on a particular building, you need to talk to the local authority about it. But there's no obligation for them to engage with you on that. Community right to bid, in contrast, is a statutory process, and it's in two parts, really. You can nominate assets of community value, and you can nominate assets of community value even if you don't want to take them over or run them. It's a simple process with the local authority. Any local organisation can nominate an asset of community value, and that nomination lasts for 5 years. And basically nothing happens unless that asset is put up for sale. But it's a very broad range of assets that are included. So the asset can be in public hands, private hands, third sector hands. There are some exclusions, mainly around dwelling houses and things like that, but it's a very broad set of buildings and land that could be included. The asset needs to be of community value. So that's quite obvious in terms of playing fields, community centres, theatres, museums, libraries, but also pubs and shops, particularly where pubs and shops are the last pub or shop in the village. And, you know, it can be great if you value a building. Why not get it on an asset of community value register? Doesn't mean you have to take it over. If the building does go on the market, then the community has the right to bid to buy the asset. If they say they do wish to think about buying the asset, there's a moratorium of 6 months, which gives time to raise capital. But note, the owner doesn't have to accept the bid from the community. It's an opportunity to bid. Now, there's new legislation going through Parliament which will change this. And the intention is that it'll give the community first refusal, and the community will have 12 months rather than 6 months moratorium to raise the funds. We don't know when this is going to come in, and we haven't seen any of the detail of this yet. But it will doubtless be on our website as soon as it is, and doubtless on Plunkett's as well. But the other alternative, you know, those are common routes by which people acquire buildings. We could just buy it. If you could raise the money to buy a building or a piece of land, you can just do that. It doesn't have to be through any form of scheme. And so I thought it'd be useful to think about, where do you start? And you may be acquiring an asset that you haven't had any involvement with before, or you may be trying to acquire an asset that you already manage. So you may have the opportunity to buy the building that you're already in, or the local authority may be offering a community asset transfer. But whatever angle you're coming from, I think it's really important to start off with your objectives, requirements, and anything which is a deal breaker. And by objectives, I mean, why do you want a building or a piece of land in the first place? So it might be space to deliver your services. It might be having a visible base. It could be saving a much-loved building. There are lots of reasons why you might want to acquire a building. The requirements you may have. I mean, if you're a theatre company, you may need to seat a minimum number of people for performances. You may need catering space and somewhere for people to sit and eat. That may be part of your business plan. Make sure that you're clear about those requirements. And there may be deal breakers. You may be looking at a great building, but it's too far from public transport. Particularly if you're working perhaps with young people or with older people who don't drive. You may need to have it close to public transport. There may be covenants on a building which prevent it from being used for certain purposes. That may mean it's not suitable. Can you adapt the space in the building? Because, many heritage buildings, the layout is what it is, and you may not be able to get permission to change it. If that is not flexible enough for you, then perhaps the building isn't for you. Now, I can see a few people, they haven't put their head in their hands yet, but they will. I think you should start doing a revenue budget right at the start, and then keep refining it as you move through the process. Base your income on your proposed activities and any likely grants. And what I mean by that is, don't just put grants in as a balancing amount. Be sure that when you're putting grants into the kind of revenue budget, you're thinking about grants that you're likely to be able to get and who they'll come from. Think about the likely costs of running your building. If you aren't already involved with the building, how much does it cost for similar buildings? Many times people will share and will tell you what it costs to run their building. Does your income exceed your expenditure? Because if it doesn't, that is a really big red flag. And you need to consider whether to progress. Think about what you're building, thinking very carefully about what you're going to do in that building. Can you tweak it? Because having a sustainable revenue business model is going to be really important in raising the capital that you need. And I would say it's all like a three-legged stool. You will all know three-legged stools. They're incredibly stable on uneven surfaces. I think the legs are the building itself, your governance, and finances. They're all equally important. And as long as they're all robust, your stool will stand up. Take away one of those legs and the stool falls over. I think it's really useful to be able to think about how you balance this. And my final thought on where do you start is look gift horses in the mouth. If somebody, particularly, if you're getting what looks like a great deal from your local authority, or the owner of the building that you manage is giving you a great deal, make sure you look really carefully at what that deal is. If it looks like a bargain, it probably isn't an asset. It could be a liability. So just beware. It can be really easy to think, oh, we've got this great offer, we must tear after it. And that's not necessarily great. How can you raise funding? Well, I think the first thing to know is how much you need. You may need money to buy a building. You may need money to refurbish it as well. Particularly if there's a lot of work needed to refurbish, you may actually need to raise money to find out how much that refurbishment is going to cost. So that's before you've even started to work on the building. Grant funders, just very briefly, would be, straightforward grants. People like the Arts Council, National Lottery Heritage Fund, Architectural Heritage Fund. Your local authority may be a good place to start. They generally haven't got a lot of money overall, but they may have access to particular pots of money. One of the ones that's around at the moment is Pride in Place. If you're in the right place, you may be able to benefit from that. And there will be local and national grant-making trusts. Another option is loan funding from social investors or possibly from high street banks. But obviously with loan funding, as in your personal lives, you have to be able to pay it back. There is the possibility of community shares, which is raising funding from the general public. It can be great for much loved local buildings where people want to invest and want to have a share of it. You put together a share offer document to invite investment. And I think some of my colleagues are going to talk much more about this, so I'm going to leave it there, apart from saying you do need advice right from the start if you're thinking about community shares. The other line is crowdfunding and high net worth individuals. From my experience, I would say it's really complex. Usually you'll have a mix of different funders and different types of funding. Often grant funders will make grants on the basis of we can give you X amount of money, but you need to spend it by Y. So you're juggling other people's deadlines. You're juggling with the time scale of actually doing the build, and it takes a lot of negotiating power. And I would also say I can't emphasize enough the importance of a strong business plan and good financials. And I think George is going to talk a lot more about that when I have finished. He's just nodding, so he is. Is it difficult to manage a building once you've got it? It needs work, but thousands of organisations across the UK do this successfully and sustainably. I think there are some key points that I would want to highlight. You want to ensure safety, thinking about things like health and safety, fire safety, first aid, safeguarding. You need to think about licenses, permissions and registrations, about performance, music, food, alcohol. Think about your insurances and make sure you've got the right insurances in place. So I could go on. Well, I have done a webinar for 3.5 hours on this, so I'm not going to talk more about it. There's plenty you could talk about. I'm going to say that Kate will be circulating a set of resources at the end of this. That will have links to the Locality website and to my community. There are some COF legacy resources which cover things like assessing the feasibility of a building, writing a business plan for a community building, for a community asset project. There is a grant funding guide, managing a build project, managing building professionals, how to market and let your spaces. So there's a huge amount of info out there. Please do make use of it. And Kate will also be circulating my email address and Localities so that if, we can help with anything, please do get in touch. And I'm going to close there, and hopefully I'm on time, Kate.
Before time, Debbie. So perfect. Thank you so much. That's really useful. A whistle-stop tour. And I love the phrase, the reversion of the inversion of the phrase, never look a gift house to look a gift horse in the mouth. Beware of free gifts. Um, and obviously, thank you, Debbie. Yes. So if anyone has any questions, if we can wait probably to the end. But if there's anything, burning at the moment, please feel free to ask Debbie while we have a few moments. Um, and you can add that in the chat or raise your hand or speak out. And in the meantime, I'll just set up George and move Debbie. And George is going to be talking from the perspective of Plunkett UK and also sharing some slides, which again we can attach to the resources after the session. That's perfect, George. We can see that.
Brilliant. So my name's George. I am the impact officer for a charity called Plunkett UK. Plunkett UK, as the name suggests, works all over the country, primarily with rural communities. To support the purchase and running of community-owned businesses. So if you think, and this came up in Debbie's talk, if you think about groups trying to save the last pub in the village from redevelopment, we offer business support, access to financial advice and things like that. Anything that you can think about that you might need to set up something of this nature. And we currently support around 850 businesses all over the UK. I can guarantee, well, almost guarantee that most people on this call will have been to at least one community-owned business at some point. They are all over the place and they cover all manner of things. Primarily, it's pubs and shops, but we deal with community farms, we deal with distilleries, energy projects, anything that you can think of with a trade at its heart that has an open democratic ownership model that operates for the benefit of the community. Excuse me, the community. So Debbie touched on this a little bit, and when you think about buying a community, a building for community use, it's worth thinking about a couple of things. Um, is that it's a big commitment to make, and is there a need for it? Are you adding something to the community by buying it? As Debbie mentioned, sort of what are you trying to achieve? What are your aims? What are the outcomes going to be? And who are you trying to benefit? Who are the target recipients for the work that you're trying to do? From a local point of view, where I live, we have a community-owned deli, and when it first opened, it was really successful. And it's become a victim of its own success because the town's got more popular, other businesses have opened here, and now we're in a position where the deli's actually losing money, and it's kind of we're at a bit of a crossroads where we have to decide whether or not actually keeping going with this with the losses is worth it, because the target market and the community need for what it was set up for is no longer there in the same way. So it's something we need to think about when we look at these community-owned buildings, as to, whilst it's sometimes a nice to have, is there a real community need for it? Um, the, as Debbie mentioned, the business planning is a crucial part of working out whether you're going to be buying a building for community use. Done properly, it's a really good way of figuring out what your aims are, really kind of crystallizing all of these ideas and thoughts and making sure that everyone is on the same page. So usually it would start with community consultation. At Plunkett UK, before you can access time with one of our advisors, we ask you to hit certain evidential markers. And one of those evidential markers is evidence that you have spoken to your local community and there is an appetite for being involved in something of this nature, whether through being used, whether you're going to be giving services or products that people need, or if you're looking at that democratic ownership model, whether or not people want to become shareholders in the business as well and have a say in how that business is run. A good business plan is essential in illustrating your plans to stakeholders, whether that be people who live in the local community, whether that be possible investors, whether that be grant funders. As Debbie mentioned with the Community Ownership Fund, Plunkett was involved in that too. And one of the biggest issues we had was making sure that people's business plan was robust and watertight. Because if you're asking anybody for money for a community project, you have to give them the confidence that you have thought this through, you have the ability to run it, and it's going to be a viable and sustainable option for everybody involved. On a community level, a really solid business plan helps your community to understand why you're doing this as well. Quite often, these businesses, say if you're thinking about maybe purchasing a theatre space, not everybody in the community is going to be interested in the theatre space, but if you can use that for different things, or you can explain the benefits of having a theatre space in your community, you can bring those people on board and they're going to be more invested in it and be more supportive of it as well. And in terms of a business plan, it should really cover a 3 to 5 year period. Anything less, and the process feels a bit more like short-term action planning. Some grant funders, as I mentioned, and social lenders prefer to see a 5 year business plan. So it's important to establish the fundraising context, i.e., if there are particular grants you're aiming for, what that grant funder would expect to see. So before you start doing any financial forecasting, it's good to look at that sort of thing. If you need to raise investment through community shares, you probably need to plan ahead for more than 3 years again, just because it's looking at the sort of potential safety of those shares in the long term. Now, if we are writing a business plan, your business plan should include the following things, and it's not limited to these, but when I was creating this presentation, I thought I wanted to get the most pertinent ones. So your mission, your aims, and your objectives. So we go back to the start of what I was talking about. Sort of, is there a need for it? What are we trying to deliver, and who are we trying to deliver it for? The details of your organization as well. So why you've started this, who the people are, why these things are important to you as well. Your products, services, and activities. So what exactly are you going to be delivering, and why is that important for your community? And leading on from that, your market and your strategy is just making sure that you can demonstrate that there is a market for your activities and how you plan to deliver to that market as well. The resources you need to start the project include things like human resources, so the people you're going to need. We often start these things with volunteers, and as I'll touch on in a little while, we'll also need professional help as well. What we're talking about specifically today is the physical, the buildings, the equipment, things that you actually need to be in and have as equipment to run your project. And finally, the resources cover finances as well. So how are you going to pay for the human element? How are you going to pay for the physical element? Your business plan should include your targets and intended outputs and outcomes. So what are you hoping to achieve again? And what's the impact going to be on your community? You need to have thought about, again, why you're doing this and why it's important for you to have this building and the impact that it's going to have on the people that live around it. We'd want you to look at the associated risks of the project, which is essentially looking at what could possibly go wrong and how you might mitigate those risks as well. So just making sure that you've understood what you're entering into and how it might change along the way. It's essentially basic project management as well, of just understanding that things might change and how are you going to respond to them. By illustrating this, it just shows that you've thought of various different outcomes for your project as well. And as Debbie touched on, it's really important to make sure you have detailed financial forecasting, including a revenue forecast. You have to seriously think about these things are a huge commitment, and you have to seriously think about how much money you're going to make, but you have to keep it realistic as well. I think through the Community Ownership Fund project, we had some stumbling blocks with some groups because in some cases they just massively overestimated what they thought was going to happen in the long term, and in some cases underestimated and had sold themselves a bit short. So it's good, a really good thing to do to make sure you sit down with somebody who knows what they're talking about and go through the figures involved. The next stage on your journey into sort of community ownership, if you like, or sort of purchasing a building for community use, is generally incorporation into a recognized legal model. There are lots of different legal models. Debbie spoke about some earlier, and I'll sort of break some down on the next slide. But the benefits of incorporation: your organization becomes a legal entity in its own right. And what this means is you are entitled to do a lot of different things. So the liability becomes limited to the amount of paid share capital or guarantee, and we'll touch on that when we look at the different legal structures. If you incorporate into certain models, members are part of a corporate body that can own property, employ staff, and enter into contracts. If you are running a building in community use, you're going to have staff to run it. Now, that might be volunteers, it might be paid staff, and it might be a mixture of the two. But to legally be able to be in charge of people in that regard is incredibly important. So incorporation comes into that. It means that your project can borrow money and receive grants if eligible. We've talked a lot about grant funding and how it's crucial to a lot of these projects. So making sure that you are incorporated into the correct model for grants that you might want to apply for is really, really important. And also, if you become incorporated, there's reduced personal risk. So that risk is equally distributed among the members. And this is quite pertinent when we talk about shareholding, which we'll touch on in a little bit as well. So moving on to the next slide, these are some of the legal structures that you might come across if you get into things like sort of buying buildings for community use or things similar to that. At Plunkett UK, the majority of community-owned businesses we work with incorporate as what's known as a community benefit society. The reason we champion this model so much, it comes back to that idea of that democratic ownership model. It's one member, one vote. So regardless of how much money you invest in your community benefit society, you're only entitled to one vote. And what that means is it really does become a reflection of the community in which it sits and isn't just the preserve of two or three local wealthy people, which isn't always a bad thing. But again, we always feel at Plunkett that the more people you can get involved in these things, the more it'll actually meet community needs because it's actually being driven by the needs of the community. A community interest company is similar in the way that it is set up to benefit the local community, but you can do this in two ways. You can set it up by guarantee or you can set it up by shares. Community benefit societies are driven by shares as well. You become a member of a CBS by buying shares, and you can do the same in a community interest company. The difference is, if you are a community benefit society, all the money that you make as a business or an organization either gets put back into that business or is used to benefit other local organizations. So it might be the youth football team, you might donate money to the WI, it could be anything of those things. Shareholders can claim back interest on their investment after 3 years if the business can afford it, but that's at the discretion of the committee. With a community interest company limited by shares, you will have shareholders, but they can be paid dividends up to 35% of profits. So it's a slightly different way of doing it, and it means that investors can make money out of it. Whereas with a community benefit society, the feeling generally is you're investing money in your local community that you can afford to, and you're not necessarily expecting to make massive returns on the interest back. A couple of the other ones you might come across is a charitable incorporated organisation, a CIO, and that's governed by the Charities Commission. And the difference between that and the three we've talked about previously is the objects shouldn't be about making profit. So it's around other slightly different things. Now, there are people that you can speak to who know infinitely more about this than I do. So if you do need to break these down, it's worth speaking to somebody who can talk to you in a bit more depth about legal structures. And the final one on this list is a company limited by guarantee, which is incredibly easy to set up and quick to set up, and actually is really easy to change one of these into any of the things above. Whereas if you start with a community interest company and you decide you want to become a community benefit society, the hoops you have to jump through are quite stringent and time consuming. So if you need to quickly legally incorporate for sort of grant funding and things like that, it might be worth looking at a company limited by guarantee as your first option, just because it means that you have a bit more flexibility should you need to change further down the line. We spoke a little bit before about working with the right people and having volunteers on board, but with anything like this, when it comes to contracts and things, you're going to need to get professional people involved. So if you're thinking about buying somewhere, you need to work with a qualified estate agent, and it often pays to look into it in detail in terms of trying to find an estate agent who's done similar to what you're trying to do, or is experienced at purchasing the buildings and things like that that you're looking to do. And one of the things that we often talk about at Plunkett is speaking to other organisations who might be relatively local to you, who might have used services. Plunkett have a number of recommended suppliers as well. So if you're a Plunkett member, we have a list of professionals that we work with as well. So it's always worth doing your homework on all of these things. But accountants, there's going to be tax issues, there's going to be stamp duty and all sorts of things to think about. So again, if you can get a sector specific accountant to look at your figures and just help you avoid any of the pitfalls. Solicitors with the surveying, solicitors and surveyors are pretty self-explanatory. You'll need solicitors for the contracts. And surveyors, it's coming back to Debbie's gift horse. You want to make sure that the building you're looking at is in the state that the sellers are saying it's going to be in, and just making sure you cover everything and know exactly what you're getting yourself in for as well. If you do decide to go with a community benefit society or a community interest company limited by shares, this is what we're getting into now. So we're issuing community shares as well, and one of the things you need to look at is if you're going to issue community shares, and this is a very basic overview of it, you need to sort of think about what the value of your shares are going to be in terms of how much you sell to people. Now, usually, the value of the shares will never change. It's not like when you invest in stocks and shares and that they go up and down. The price of a community share is the price of a community share. In a lot of cases, these are governed by the Financial Conduct Authority, and they've set out the idea that you can't make a share worth more than £100,000. What we often see is when people start community benefit societies, it's for one of two reasons. You're either trying to grow membership or you're trying to grow capital. If you're trying to grow membership, you might want to keep share prices at £1 per share. And if you're trying to raise capital, you might want to have that £1 per share, but you might make your minimum shareholding £50, £100. It's one of those things where you would look at your local demographics and see what people can afford to buy, can afford to invest based on your target as well. And quite often, once you've set your investment target out, the maximum shareholding will be a percentage of that. But again, it's using your local knowledge to make sure that you don't price people out of investing. The thing with community ownership, from our point of view, is we want as many people, as I say, to be involved in this as possible. We don't want there to be financial barriers for people to be able to have their say, because then we start to lose some of that community element as well. And finally, again, another thing that Debbie mentioned was crowdfunding. Crowdfunding looks very different various different platforms as well. But a lot of crowdfunding websites now offer the opportunity to have a managed share issue that they will look after on your behalf. So these are all things to think about when deciding what sort of model you want to look at as well. And I'll be sharing my email address too. So if you think that you're in a rural area and you would like some advice about a project that you've got planned, please feel free to get in touch. We're happy to have a chat with anybody. So yeah, have a natter with us and see if we can help you out a little bit. And there, I think Debbie mentioned the community right to bid and the community asset transfer. The majority of businesses that Plunkett work with actually use their capital raised by community shares and make a direct purchase. So they will go to the owner of the building. Typically with us, it's pubs and shops. So they will go to the owner and a deal will be made. It usually takes a while. What we see a lot is, particularly with pubs, we see them being overpriced with the idea that the owner wants to turn it into residential housing. So there's a bit of back and forth as well, and just making sure we get these things right. Compulsory purchase orders are very uncommon within sort of community ownership. You'd see more things with the HS2 rail line and things like that. CPOs are much more prevalent in that sector. When it comes to community ownership, councils are very reticent to get involved due to the associated costs. It can be really expensive for legal fees and all sorts of things to make sure that a compulsory purchase order goes through. And long-term leases, again, if you look at long-term leases, a lot of grant funders will accept 15 to 20 years as a long-term lease because it shows that you have got a long time within the building and that you've got a long-term plan, and it sort of comes back to the business plan as well, which kind of takes us back to where we started, really. So, as I say, please feel free to make a note of my email address. I know that Kate will circulate these at the end of the session as well. But if you have any questions or you think of something after the fact, please don't hesitate to drop me an email. I might not be able to help, but I can certainly signpost you to somebody who can.
Oh, thank you, George. That was wonderful. And the slides are very, very informative. So yeah, as I said earlier, we'll be sending those through. Thank you. Right, I will respond. And we next have Matthew Oakridge, who's going to give us again a bit more perspective about private purchase, but specifically shareholding from a music venue's perspective.
Thank you. Thanks for having me along today. I'm just going to get this tech set up a sec. Hopefully be super quick.
Yes, we can see that.
That's great. I'm just going to make it into a full page and then we're good to go. Cool. So yeah, nice to meet you all today. Thanks for coming along. I'm going to talk a little bit about music venue properties and what we do, and then talk a bit about my top tips, although actually I did note that all of my top tips have been said already. So hopefully I don't bore you too much. I would say that one area of difference perhaps or something that's not been raised so far is I actually do a lot of work through Music Venue Trust, which is our sister charity of Music Venue Properties. We're helping venues looking at community ownership. And actually, I suppose what's a little bit different to what's been discussed today so far is that we're often working with people who are already in the buildings who are then looking to sort of take them on. So maybe that's a little bit different, although actually a lot of the same things still apply. It probably just makes it a little bit easier because the business plan is a bit closer to being decided. There's less different things up for discussion at that point because they know how the business works. But anyway, we'll move on to that in a bit, and hopefully if I cover some of the same ground, you'll forgive me. So yeah, Music Venue Properties. That's who I work for. It's a community benefit society, and we essentially came together because there was an issue within grassroots music sector, and that was that many of these venues were closing. 35% have closed in the last, I should know this off by heart and my things in the way, the last 20 years. In the last 24 months, there's been 150 venues lost, and that's largely because The sector operates at a profit margin of 0.48%, which is barely any profit margin at all. And in fact, if you get a little bit deeper into that 0.48%, you'll realize it's because a lot of people choose not to pay themselves and therefore are probably actually technically making losses. And so the big problem that we noticed was that the vast majority of the sector just didn't own the property that they were operating from. And actually, when we started this project a few years ago, that 81% that's on this slide was 93%. And, you know, that's come down for a couple of reasons. The first one is that obviously there are schemes like ours around, but also it's because the number of venues has decreased and there's a disproportionate amount of venues closing that weren't community owned versus, or who own their own property, versus the ones that did own their own property. So it just meant the you know, the outlook for venues that own their own property was much higher. So the other big problem and is the lack of security. The average tenancy in the sector being around 18 months, which has all sorts of wide-ranging problems, not least kind of the mental health of the operators, but more practically, George just talked a little bit about capital grant funding, and you know, most capital grants aren't available for anything less than a 15-year lease, and quite often can be higher than that. So if the average music venue has 18 months left on their lease, well, none of them are getting any of this kind of capital grant funding. So yeah, the sector is effectively at the mercy of commercial landlords who are just at the very kind of heart of it all, don't have the same kind of intentions as the people who are running these venues. So enter Music Venue Properties. Music Venue Properties is a community benefit society, which again, George just talked about. So I'm not going to go into lots of detail on that. But we used it mainly for the second reason that George gave, which was the raising of capital. It was obviously the community shares mechanism is a friendly way of finance, which you know, tells a story and creates a lot of momentum as well, is what we found, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So this was an innovative solution for the future to combat the outmoded business models and the underinvestment in the grassroots music sector. So what we've done is in 2021, I believe, no, 2022, we launched our first share offer. This was on the back of Music Venue Trust. We were obviously at the back end of the pandemic at that point. Music Venue Trust had actually achieved quite a large platform during the COVID times, and which allowed us to you know, a springboard to launch this community share offer, to do something quite ambitious, which we came to realize afterwards was that we were probably a community land trust or a land trust model, but done through a different mode of doing it through the community shares. By the time we weren't aware of anything like this, and we were just taking my experience of having previously ran a community share offer for a community-owned venue in Bristol, which is called The Exchange, and thinking, well, how could we apply this for the national picture to address this very acute problem of ownership within the sector. So in that first community share offer, we raised 2.8 million. It was a mix of finance, which it was exactly what the other speakers have both talked about so far today. And actually, what I would like to expand on a bit is that bit about momentum. So in our case, we hit the we opened our share offer and we said, this is something we want to do. Who will back us here? And the first people to back us was the community. They were the ones who came in and said, yes, grassroots music venues are important to us. Yes, we want to get behind this idea. We're fed up of seeing all of these places that mean so much to us closing all the time. So actually, what happened for us was that we, off the bat, raised £200,000. We were trying to raise 2.5 at the time. And that then gave assurance to other organizations. So first of all, a few kind of music industry bodies kind of made some large donations, such as Sony and Amazon and things like that. And that gave the assurance to Arts Council England, who came in and gave us a grant for about £500,000, I believe. And then because we built this capital stack of quite sort of friendly finance, we were able to get an impact loan from Figurative. which got us to roughly our total, which allowed us to start the process. At that point, we put together an experienced kind of board, and we're very fortunate. This can be often a difficulty for community benefit societies, but in music venue properties case, we've got a really great board of people who have experience in legal, experience in property, governance, and community shares, marketing. So yeah, we basically got a very strong board of people who give a lot of time and embrace it. Community benefit societies at the heart of it come from the cooperative model, and I think they embrace it in that kind of spirit. They give quite a lot of time, despite the fact that none of them get paid. So we're very fortunate from that regard, and certainly that's something that any community benefit society that's setting up wants to be thinking about, because those expertise are really important. So a really key point of what I haven't really mentioned about MVP is that we go in to buy the music venues to rent them to the current operators. The current operators are often CICs, and in one case is actually a community benefit society themselves. So we've got a situation where one CBS is renting to another CBS, which is quite interesting and probably quite unique in the national sphere. But yeah, we're not about running these venues. We're about supporting these operators and giving them a benevolent landlord and the bedrock to succeed. We put in place what we call cultural lease. Cultural lease is 25 years long, so straight away they're able to start looking. They have that security, they have that kind of ability to look at capital grants, for example, and to make the most out of their places, and to often do all the things that they wish they could have done, but weren't able to. A number of the venues that we bought at the point we bought them were on the open market. They just didn't know if they would even be there in a month's time. Most of them's leases that had expired at that point as well. So essentially MVP, what we're trying to do is become the national trust for music venues. So this is a little bit about, I covered some of that a minute ago. I always do this with slides, just cover the next slide accidentally, but that is quite an informative slide to let you know how we got to where we are today, which is that we now own 7 music venues up and down the country, 5 in England, 2 in Wales. We're hoping to get to Scotland at some point, but we've got a number of other music venues that we're currently doing the conveyancing on, and we would hope by the end of the year to be in the region of certainly double figures to get to 10. We're hoping we might be able to get to 12, which we're reliably told would make us the biggest owner of grassroots music venues in the UK, so whatever that is worth. So yes. And this gives you an idea of that capital stack that we talked about. So I talked about the first share offer. We've since done a second share offer, and to date we've raised over £5 million, and that gives you an idea there of that capital stack. We roughly about half of our money has come from community shares, and then grants and donations make up, I don't know what's that, I'm doing a bit of mental arithmetic here. I'm going to say approximately 30%, and then 20% loan. I would say for a long point in our existence, we had what we always seem to be at a third of each. It's only recently skewed into a different direction with the community shares after a recent large artist investment. But yeah, I think it's really important to understand your capital stack, and most importantly, the cost of that capital, and also the hidden cost of some of that capital, because actually, it was alluded to a little bit earlier, but when you look at things like the grants, for example, well, there's generally quite a lot of reporting that goes along with that. There's sometimes having to get legal charges in place, which can take months and months. I mean, anybody on this call who was fortunate/unfortunate enough to receive community ownership funds may share my pain in that regard. It was quite a tortuous process, and in our case, I don't think either of the two situations are resolved 18 months after receiving the grant. So it was quite long-winded. But of course, these things are worth persevering with when you effectively know at the end of it all, it's free capital. There isn't a percentage that you're going to be paying it on it every month. And that's key to understanding your business model. What is your cost of capital needed to achieve that business model in the first place? So yes, I think also going back to that last slide, another point with the community shares, I think when you create these business models and your cash flow forecasts and what have you, obviously you need to model for any interest that you plan to pay. I know that not every community benefit society even offers interest. I think the majority who are trying to raise capital probably do. I would suggest there's probably a correlation between higher interest and perhaps more investment. And obviously you also want to model the idea of paying back that capital. In practice, what we've learned, and I'm not sure if this is a sector just because of our sector, is we've spent a lot of time getting to know our investors afterwards. And what we've found is actually the vast majority of them, I think it works out roughly that 50% of them don't care about getting any interest or their capital returned. About 25% of them don't care about any interest and but would like that to see their capital back at some point. And then the other 25% roughly were interested in both. So that's quite an interesting thing to find out afterwards, because again, that's an impact on your cost of finance. And we've just come up to our first interest payment, and again we found that the amount that people have actually asked for is well below what we ever modeled. So obviously you need to be careful kind of being too optimistic in that regard, but it's certainly a worthwhile exercise after you complete a community share offer to kind of get to know your audience. And I think the other thing is thinking about how to service those investors, because it's, as I just said, it's not just about interest. It's about sort of making them feel part of something. And if you do that well, then they're going to be more understanding if you find yourself in sort of difficult situations, because let's be fair, it's a very uncertain world at the moment. Costs can change unexpectedly very quickly. We saw that in the energy crisis, and obviously we're still going through a cost of living crisis at the moment. So knowing that you have that kind of friendly finance and a group of people who are backing the idea, and I think you can foster and kind of that relationship and make it even better by kind of servicing that group of people with information. In our case, we monthly mail out. We're sort of, if we hold events after we buy a venue, we make sure that all of those people who have invested in the local area have the opportunity to come along to it. And I suppose actually it's a lot easier to service people in some regard if actually if you're not looking to do something as outlandish as this and buy venues all over the country, and you're just buying the one. Obviously, you probably have an events program, and you're going to have sort of days where you could probably do with a few more bodies in the room. So that kind of thing of offering that audience kind of discounts on tickets, for example, or kind of guest list to events where you could do with those bodies in the room. It's quite making people feel kind of excited to be part of that membership is at the core of the kind of identity of community shares. So yeah, this I think is a nice little map showing where all of our investors are, and we have little kind of I think since I last looked at this, Chris has very cleverly put on little houses for where our venues are as well. So quite often we might see a spike of investment in those cities when we're looking to buy one. Actually, this map only has the first 5 and the first 1,300 members, which is before this more recent share offer. But yeah, it gives you an idea. But it also shows actually that the idea has resonated with a lot of people who aren't in those cities. There's obviously quite a lot there in London, for example, where people have realised actually these places are just really important, and the ecosystem is really important. And they may not go to Dover or Preston or Newport, like where our venues are, but they recognise that those communities really need those spaces. So let me get the next slide. So yeah, this is a little bit of an idea of what we've managed to achieve. Those are the 7 venues that we bought, and the impact of owning them and securing them for the long-term future. I won't read out all of those things, but it gives you an idea of. So yes, powering change through community. So obviously, just to recap, this is where the need was because of the uncertainty within the sector and the opportunity of the ownership, which is creating these lasting cultural and economic benefits. This is about innovation. It's about cooperation. It's about long-term security for these venue operators and the people who use these places. And I think it's really important that with our model, we've even got the backdrop of if an operator fail, obviously the operators will receive more support than most operators would, because they would be much more likely to have a less benevolent landlord. But obviously we've also are in a position where, should an operator fail, well, we're connected with Music Venue Trust, and we'd be able to look to bring in another operator to continue running that venue to ensure that is there forevermore. So I think that probably covers off most of what I was going to say. I did have a few notes about let me just close this down a second. Stop share. There we go. Did have a few notes, about tips in general. I do feel like most of them have been covered off, but I will go back over them because it just gives you a sense of how everybody thinks they're important. So there must be some sense in that. So obviously understanding your business model, as I mentioned, in my case, I mainly end up supporting music venues who are already existing. So that's very useful because you've got a lot of data there that perhaps a group of a community group may not have if they're looking to open a space for the first time. But there would be changes. Obviously, when you move forward, you might be able to kind of, with a community share offer may offer the capital. So in the case of my music venue, it allowed us to open a second stage when we did it. So we had 2 stages, and that brought in extra revenue. So obviously we did have to, although we had the kind of the bedrock on how to base these financial figures, we had to kind of imagine, well, how will it be different if we're running a second stage, with the extra staff resourcing, etc., etc. I really think, as I said earlier, really important about the understanding the cost of capital and what you might look to achieve in a community share offer, and how a community share offer may allow you to. It's great for match funding, for example. It's brilliant for capital grants when you need a match fund. I think it tells a really powerful story to the funder that goes beyond the fact that you have match funding. If you can say, we've had 1,000 people invest, I think that is a great thing that a grant funder would love to read. And then I guess the other key thing is just understanding your community. And it's one thing to have an idea of, okay, yes, this is the capital stack that will get us from A to B, and allow us to achieve this business model. But you do really need to kind of understand if the funding is effectively out there. It's really important to understand whether do people want to become part of your community benefit society? Do people even have the funds available? I think it can sometimes be difficult when I've seen music venues, some, particularly after COVID, when a lot of people had ran crowdfunders recently anyway to keep themselves alive during those difficult times. I think there's only so many times you can go back to that well, and so even though it is different raising community shares versus a conventional crowdfunder, so many people will use crowdfunder as the platform by which to do that, and there are other platforms out there, but a lot of the time crowdfunder is used, it can kind of conflate and confuse matters a little bit. And obviously just got to be confident that you can do it, because to be fair, regardless of whether you own arguably maybe even harder sometimes if you own a business already and to run a community share campaign. A community share campaign has been are brilliant. We've raised a lot of money and done so much with it. Same with my music venue, but actually you can't underestimate the amount of resourcing it takes. It's really a full-time job for somebody for at least 6 months, if not longer, between the phase of understanding how you need to be governed, how you are going to market the campaign, raise the money, and then during the campaign period itself, and that can last kind of weeks, if not months in some cases. So I think all of those things are important to consider. There is a big resourcing issue there, but there are organisations such as Plunkett, such as Co-ops UK, who can offer small grants, sometimes development grants. I think I'm right in saying that, George. Tell me if I'm wrong. I know that Co-ops UK certainly do reach fund that can help get some of these ideas off the ground, with many experts out there who can support in those matters. It's been sort of transformative, I would suggest, for the projects I've been involved in, and I would always encourage people to consider it. And another big top tip for me is, I find that people who have done it successfully are some of the most giving people with their time. There really is a kind of, one of the the principles of cooperatives is cooperation amongst cooperatives, and that's certainly been my experience. Like I when with the exchange back in 2017, when we were looking at this, I went and saw Le Pub in Newport, who are set up as a community benefit society, despite also that's the one that Music Venue Properties also owns the building for, who is a community benefit society. Because sometimes, I should qualify, sometimes CBSs actually exist to purchase long-term leases, for example. So in the case of Le Pub, I think they'd set up to buy a sort of 10-year lease and to do a bit of development work in the building. But yeah, to go back to the main point, Le Pub and Comedian Bath was another one. Everybody was extremely giving with their time, and I always felt like I was asking too much, but they would come back to me sort of saying, oh, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? So I think reaching out, and certainly I think, again, that sounds like something that Plunkett are able to do, kind of maybe let you do a bit of kind of mapping the dots of people who've been successful in your local area, for example. And I suppose it's worth looking at people who've succeeded locally, but also people who've succeeded further away, but in your sector, because I think both things are quite important to understand in that regard. I think that probably wraps it up for me, I would say. And I think that was about 20 minutes. So in fact, I've just got my note to say stop talking. So I've timed that well. So it was much kinder than that. But we'll go to the break now, and I'll pass you back over to Kate. Thanks for your time, Morgan.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm just saying, just coming to the break. So we have 10 minutes now for a break. Grab a cuppa, come back again at, let's just say, at 18 minutes past 3, and we're going to have welcome 2 actual case studies to see what it looks like in practice with Chris and Lenny. So see you soon. Hello, I hope you've all managed to get something to drink and had a quick refreshment. I'm thrilled now to welcome Chris from Jesmond Library in Newcastle upon Tyne, who's going to talk about their example of community ownership. Right, I'll just put up your slides, Chris.
Is everybody back from their tea, do you think?
We've got, most people, but I'll let people just come in when they're ready.
You could go on to the second one straight away, really.
Great. Okay. I will just put it on from beginning. That's it. That's it. There you go.
Right. That's our library. That's Jesmond Library. I'm one of the trustees of Jesmond Library. As you'll see from the picture, we're comparatively unusual in that we're a modern 1960s library In fact, we're a listed building, so we're a heritage building, because at the time we were regarded as the first of the new wave buildings of that period, and we were awarded RIB awards, Civic Trust awards, all sorts of awards. And in fact, English Heritage said that we were one of the 10 best libraries in the whole country. So we have a heritage. But like all councils, Newcastle Council was hit by the need to make budget cuts in 2012. There was a public meeting in December of that year, and about 300 or 400 people turned up to object. So we knew right from the start that there was very strong public support for not closing the library. And a charitable organisation, the Friends of Jesmond Library, was formed. It had two aims. The first failed. That was to persuade the council to keep the library open itself. But at the same time, the Friends agreed that if the council carried on with the closure, we would form a charity and limited company, take over the building and run it as a public library instead. It's pretty significant that we had a lot of support from Jesmond Pool, which is about 50 yards from the library, and had gone through exactly the same process right back in the 1990s. I think it was 1991 when Jesmond Pool was closed by the council, and a community enterprise was formed to run the swimming pool. And in fact, I was one of the trustees of the swimming pool for many years. So we knew that the model could work. We had help from them. We had help from Little Chalfont Library, who were already running. We had help from Locality, and I fully agree with other people who've said that do take advantage of all the help and advice you can get from other libraries, other organisations and community groups. There is, in fact, now a national network of community libraries because there's so many of them all over the place. As has also been said before, one of the first things we had to do was to draw up a business plan to show that we could be viable. The council were clearly closing the library because they thought it was bound to carry on losing money. So we had to demonstrate that it was possible to run a library on a completely different model, i.e. run by volunteers. The council were very happy to discuss asset transfer, but they made it very clear right from the start that they would have no money, and that if we took over the building, we would be responsible for 100% of the running costs, and we would have to be on our own effectively. We did get informal advice from council officers because, not surprisingly, librarians who'd been invested in running a library service were quite keen on the idea that the library should survive, but they just knew that they had no money. So we started fundraising locally. As I said, there was 300 or 400 people turned up at a public meeting, and many of those put their hands in their pockets to help set up the organisation. Another late, should I say, resident of Jesmond was Catherine Cookson, who many of you may remember as a very, very successful novelist of a few years back. And she set up the Catherine Cookson Trust, which is based in our neighbourhood. And they were about the first charitable trust we approached for money. Anyway, in August and September of that year, we held open days, and we reopened on the 21st of September 2013, which was about 4 months after we were closed by the council. So, next picture, please. That's the reopening, and I think it's of interest that the two ladies right in the middle were the librarians operating the building on behalf of the council, who were there to wish us well in taking over the building. And if I can show you the next picture, the next picture is the celebrations of our 10th birthday, and all those people were in the previous photograph, and whether you can see how much they've aged in the 10 years. In fact, we've been going for 12 years now. So the next slide, please. What were the lessons that we've learned over the period? And I'd obviously be happy to expand on any of this if you've got questions. First of all, the widespread local support was absolutely essential. It could not have possibly happened if it had been a couple of people, moaning about the closure of the library. It was dozens, hundreds of local people. Now, in our case, it was very helpful that the local people understood that without their efforts, the facility will close. It was closed for 4 months. So there was absolutely no doubt whatsoever in people's minds that unless they pulled their fingers in their pockets and got on with it, the place would not reopen. I said, take advantage of all the available skills and advice and draw up a sound business plan. The basis of our business plan, which I think, again, harks back to something some other people have said, was that the building should be run on the basis of earned income, and that we should not rely on grants others than for extras, by which I mean things like improving the building, buying completely new bits of kit or whatever. And so we cover the whole of the running costs of the building from earned income. You might say, how on earth do you earn income from a public library? Well, you don't do it from lending out books. You do it by running an extensive events program. The events program has evolved in line with people's interests. I would say we try everything in the terms of trying out events and renting out rooms. People need to have confidence, though, that it is possible. And I'll just show you a few of the things that we actually do in our library. I don't want to give you the impression that we don't lend out books, because we do, and we spend a lot of money on buying new books. But we also do a few other things, which I'll show you next. The first of the pictures may be of interest to some of our musical colleagues, because we run music events in the library. And that's an example of one of our music events, and for which people pay a £5 entry fee. We give some of it to the artists if they want it, but a lot don't. So that's one thing we do to help raise money. The next slide, I think, is children's crafts. We run lots of children's events, story times, children's crafts, and so on. Parents of small children tend to be less generous than musical fans, I'm afraid. But anyway, we run a lot of events for kids. And the next picture, please, is also another thing we do a lot of, which is events for older people. We have a series of monthly events for local people. We also do a whole range of other things. Next picture I'll just end on, but I'll just say that we also have a lot of language events. We have current affairs discussion groups. We have a chess club. We have all sorts of different events going on in the building. And we're so fortunate that the building is very, very flexible. Most of the bookshelves are on wheels, so we can push them out of the way easily and push them back. So I think I've said enough for now, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions either in this session or if you like to send me any emails afterwards, by all means do. And that's the library when it's set up as a library as opposed to a music venue.
Thank you, Chris. That was really insightful. And it looks like such a fabulous space. Because is it a grade 2 listed building as well?
Yes, it is grade 2 listed building.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, being a listed building doesn't give you access to any extra money, which is unfortunate. And on the other side of it, any improvements to the building are much more expensive because of the need to fit in with the building. But we all love the building, so we don't begrudge it.
No, it's beautiful. It's a proper gem. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm sure there's going to be questions, but I think we'll just move on for the moment to Lenny, and then we can come back and talk about both of your buildings and programs.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes,
I'm going to also get my slides set
yeah,
up.
Wonderful. And let me just find you, Lenny, as well, so you can see your face.
Great. Sorry, I'm just figuring out to go into present mode. There we go. Great. So, hi everyone. I am one of the founders of Sister Midnight. We are a community benefit society based in Lewisham in South London. And as you can see, we are all about creating community-owned creative spaces in our local area. There's kind of three key parts to the work that we do. So when we started out, the focus of Sister Midnight was opening a community-owned music venue in Lewisham Borough. And as we've gone along this journey and grown, the work has kind of evolved to include our community radio station, which runs over in Hither Green. And we also do a lot of work around advocating and incubating other cultural co-ops, so helping other people to start these kind of businesses. So Sister Midnight has been founded on this core belief that music is a tool for social and political change, and that is really at the heart of everything that we do, and guides all of the way that we work and the way that we think about what kind of space we want to see exist in Lewisham. And a little bit of history on how Sister Midnight got started, because actually we started back in 2018, and at that point we weren't a co-op. It was just my own business that I'd started. And I'd got into that because there was a local record shop that had like a tiny 50 capacity music venue underneath in the basement. And during my degree, I asked them if I could volunteer there and get a bit of experience, and just absolutely loved it and saw firsthand what an important space that was to the community. And then by the time I was coming to the end of my degree, the owners of that space had decided that they wanted to close it down and pass on the lease to someone else who would turn it into a cheese and wine bar. And I thought that would be a real shame. So I said if they were willing to give the lease to me instead, that I would take a stab at keeping it as a record shop and venue. And they said yes, and that was how Sister Midnight started. I had absolutely no experience in running any kind of business, let alone a music venue, but I guess I was a lot braver when I was 22. We had that space for a couple of years, and then unfortunately the pandemic forced us to close that space, and it was a temporary closure, which then turned into a permanent one. But during the pandemic, I had a lot of time to sit and think, and think about where I wanted to take Sister Midnight next. And it was actually through Music Venue Trust that I learned about the idea of community benefit societies and raising money from your local community. And it was through having a conversation with Matt that I actually decided to go ahead with trying to raise some money to get a more permanent building. And I'll chat a little bit more about that process in a bit, but I just wanted to quickly touch on our kind of view of the venue that we're trying to open, and why we wanted to do it as community owned. So part of the problem that we had with our old space was that the space was owned by a private landlord who didn't want to maintain it. And in the pandemic, he just stopped doing repairs to the building, and we had floods from above and sewage bubbling up from below because of the condition of the building. And that was a big part of the reason why we had to move on from that space. So we wanted to have a space where we would have more control and accountability over the ownership. We also wanted to become formally not for profit because we'd basically never made any money anyway. And we felt that by making a commitment to being not for profit, that would help us to get more community support and more funding support. We wanted to create a space that could be open all day, every week, sustainably. And we also wanted to create a venue that would be a community hub, not just a performance space. And this is just a little bit about how we run as a co-op now that we are set up. We have these 4 key groups: our members, our committee, our board, and our workers, who all play a collective role in making really important decisions and setting strategy and generating new ideas for the co-op. And collectively, all of these different groups played a role in establishing our values, which we have here, which are kind of an extension of that core belief around music being a tool for political and social change. And this is kind of what we always root everything we do in, and come back to these and think about how they guide our work. And this is something that has evolved over the process of the community ownership campaign. So how did we go from an idea that I had in my bedroom in lockdown to actually taking action to start a community-owned venue? Well, as I've said, the first thing that I did was call up Music Venue Trust and speak to Matt and ask, what was your experience like and how did you get started? And Matt said to me, well, there's this guy called Dave. And so he put me in touch with Dave, and I chatted to Dave and said, Dave, I've seen this empty pub on the high street in Lewisham that I think would be a really great venue, and it's up for sale for £3 million, and I'd like to buy it. And I was fully expecting Dave to say, yeah, that's an absolutely mental idea, don't try it. But what he actually said was, great, let's get cracking. So we did. And Dave is a community shares and co-op practitioner, and I would highly recommend to anyone who is thinking of starting the journey of going down this path of community ownership with buildings to have a chat to Dave or someone like Dave. Dave's details are here. I actually loved working with Dave so much that I trained as a co-op practitioner as well, and I now work with him. So both our emails are there if you want to get in touch about your project. But Co-ops UK also has a list of practitioners on their website, and there's lots all over the country. So we'd just definitely say community ownership is such a niche area of expertise that having someone to hold your hand through that process is definitely very useful. So always make that your starting point. We wanted to buy our building and raise money through community shares, and I know a lot of other people have touched on community shares, so I won't go too much into that. But getting from this sort of starting point of knowing there's a building, we want to buy it, and we want to raise a load of money from our community to be able to do that. The things that we needed to get to the point of launching the share offer were money to pay for our own time and working on it, money to pay for consultants, and a lot of professional support. Now, we had like a very specific circumstance, which was that we were starting this in lockdown when there was something called cultural recovery funding available, which was actually delivered through Arts Council. And it was funding for businesses that were closed during the pandemic. And we received that, which meant that we were still able to be paid wages. But because we couldn't operate our venue, we had a lot of time to be able to work on this project. And I do think that that's something, there's a real gap in the funding landscape for now, is people being able to pay themselves to work on starting these projects. But we did have a lot of other support from other people, including Plunkett. They were one of the first organisations to fund us, actually. They gave us a small grant that paid for some of Dave's time to work with us on developing the share offer. And there was also a programme which was delivered by Cooperatives UK and the GLA, and also Power to Change. And that helped to cover cost of consultants and developing our share offer and getting us to the point of launching. Now, some of the grants that we accessed aren't still around, but Co-ops UK do have 2 programmes still called the business support program and the booster program, and both of those can provide money to help you to start a share offer to get on your journey. So I just really recommend those as starting points. So once we'd got all of the documents together that we needed, like a business plan, which I know George spoke a bit about, and our share offer document and our financial forecasts, how did we actually market the share offer? Well, we literally tried everything, and it was the busiest 6 months of my entire life, I reckon. We did social media, and that wasn't just our own social media, that was getting loads of other people to post on their socials too. We did newspaper ads, we had a PR consultant, we had a whole press campaign, fundraiser gigs, you name it, we tried it. You know, I was spending most of my evenings out on the streets, knocking on my neighbours' doors, trying to talk to them about the project and get them to buy shares. And this is one of the billboard campaigns that we did. I think this was a really great exercise for us as an organisation in terms of just having this, you know, large but fairly limited space where we had to summarise everything that we were trying to do as a project. And so it was really nice for us to be able to come up with this beautiful piece of artwork, which our friend Toby Evans-Jezra did for us, that tries to capture all of the different like events. You know, you can see people having community meetings, cooking, browsing records, playing instruments, recording, at a gig, dancing, and it was really just to show like the kind of potential that we felt our building could have. And where we're at today is we still don't actually have our venue open, although we are getting close to it. But we have raised £450,000 through community shares and brought on over 1,300 members to our co-op. So we started in 2021 and we're in 2026 now. So you might be thinking, what took so long? Well, we have been on a few twists and turns in the journey. And we did this little mind map to try and explain all of the different key events that have happened over the course of this campaign. And the pub that we initially set out to buy actually fell through partway through our first share offer, and we had to have a big scramble around and think, what are we going to do with all of this money that we've raised? Are we going to keep it? Are we going to return it to people? How would we ever find another building? Because in London, finding a space that will work as a venue is just so rare. But fortunately, when we closed our share offer, when we realised that we weren't going to be able to buy this pub, we went back to everyone in the community who'd invested and said, what should we do? Do you want your money back? Or should we keep the money that we've raised and try and find a new building? And pretty much everyone was on board with finding a new space, which was great. So we got to work, and it took us, to be fair, 8 months to find a space that was workable as a music venue. And I think that's still a pretty quick turnaround for the London property market. We actually ended up getting a building from our local council, which is a former working men's club in Catford, and this is it. And the council were going to demolish this as part of a long-term town centre redevelopment plan in Catford, but we managed to persuade them to let us use it instead. Initially, they were offering us 4 years at market rent, and we negotiated our way up to a 16-year lease with 11 years rent-free. In exchange for that, we had to fund all of the repairs to the building, which, as you can see, are fairly extensive. This was when we were first looking at it in 2022. And it took us until 2024, 2 years, to negotiate the lease with the council and get keys to the building to be able to start works. In fact, even once we got keys, it took us a lot longer to get our license for alterations granted to the building. So we couldn't even start until February 2025. In that time, the cost of refurbishing the building went up a lot, and we've had to scale back our plans just to opening one part of it and then figuring out how to fundraise the rest of the money as we go once we're open. So it really has been quite a journey, and we have been very lucky to have the patience of our community throughout that process. This is what the building was looking like a few months ago now that we've got works happening on site. We're replacing the whole roof and doing some structural repairs to the floor, which, as you can see, has got these massive nasty cracks in it. But we are now on track, hopefully, to be opening the venue later this year, which is very exciting. So I will leave it there because I know that we're short on time and people have a lot of questions. But yeah, thank you so much to Arts Council for giving us the space to talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much, Lenny. What a privilege to see behind the scenes your progress so far and where you are now, and the twists and turns. It's just, yeah, an enormous feat you've managed to get to where you are at the moment. So that was thrilling. Thank you. I'll just remove the spotlight and open the floor out to kind of questions. We have 10 minutes for questions. Please feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you're brave enough, just jump in or put your hand up. You can put it up one of the sign hands. That'd be great. So I'll be able to see that's quicker. I'm just going to go into our chats now. Yes, we had in the chat, we've got amazing work, Lenny. So inspiring to hear you speak. Thank you. And an earlier question we had, which doesn't relate to the previous case studies, but from Locality and Plunkett, was Imogen Slater asked if anyone has experience of getting community ownership of a church-owned buildings, plural, and can they be listed as community assets?
I'm happy to jump in here, Kate.
Great.
If you want to take it, Debbie.
Go for it, George.
Why don't you
well,
start, George?
I'll start, and if I miss anything off, which I obviously will, please feel free to jump in. Imogen, my understanding is that churches can be listed as assets of community value as long as part of the work that they're doing is to sort of help the community. I know that it's tricky to get Church of England churches listed as assets of community value. Plunkett's done some work previously about having community-owned businesses operating in active places of worship. So we've got a couple of community-owned shops in there. What's your situation?
It's a community centre that's attached to a church.
Okay, and is it a C of E church?
Yes, I think so. I'm not very religious, so yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think I was just because I saw your message in the chat, so I just did a bit of digging while we had the case studies on, and I think the Church of England thing might be a bit of a stumbling block. But Debbie, is there anything you can add to this?
I suppose what I would say is that it does depend on who owns it. In theory, you can list a religious building as long as George said it does work in the community. But it can be quite a long process with churches which are established, churches which don't stand alone, but which are part of things like the Church of England or the Methodists, had recent experience of the Baptists, and it often needs to go through an awful lot of hoops before they can agree to it. There's often also issues around if it's a full church, if it's linked into a church building, if you're trying to take part of it, often there will be ownership by the congregation about what is going on. They may try to restrict what you can do in the building. And I think for anyone who's thinking of actually taking on a full church building, there are obviously issues around deconsecrating it. And, if you're actually going to own it long term, it's going to be yours and freehold. It may have some difficult little parts of it, like spires and steeples and this sort of thing, which are obvious, are usually redundant areas as far as actually earning money from them or doing community activity or anything like that in it. But
Debbie,
still,
Debbie, sorry, it's not a church building. It's a 70s built community centre attached to.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I'd sort of gone more generally onto If you are, because a lot of organisations do end up taking over churches, take over an actual church building. But I mean, I guess, are you finding that they're not willing to sell the building to you or rent it to you on a long lease? Or, I mean,
No, we're not at that. We're not at that stage. I think the first thing would be to get it listed as a community asset, if that was possible.
I mean, that's about. I mean, to see what George thinks. I mean, I think that's it can be a two-edged sword on something like that if you're already operating from the building, because it may be because sometimes it gets up the nose of the owners, and it may be easier to just start having a conversation with them about the possibility of them giving you a long lease or selling you the freehold if you could actually separate it off clearly and just have a chat with them. Do you rent it at the moment from them?
No, I don't rent it. I'm one of the user groups, and things are quite tricky.
I think from our experience, it always, as Debbie says, it always pays to start with just having a conversation. We've had issues in the past with pubs where people have nominated pubs for assets of community value, and the owners have been so put out by it that they've actually refused to get into any negotiations with any of the community groups that are looking to buy it. So I think it's one of those things where, as Debbie says, if you can start a dialogue with the people who own it, quite often there a lot of these we find with our experience as well. There's quite a lot of these buildings that are trying to be disposed of in various ways because they're quite costly to keep going. So it might be that they've already had a thought about getting rid of it, Imogen, anyway. So, as I say, I would start with just having a natter, and then maybe investigate the asset of community value if it gets a bit sort of stuck in the mud after that, perhaps.
Okay, thank you both. Really helpful.
No problem. You're on mute, Kate.
Great. Thank you very much, George. I was going to say thank you so much. I was just wondering if anyone had any other questions or are in the process or have purchased or taken ownership of a building. I'm just looking at the chat as well. Lenny has stated in the chat that she's looked at as well, has experience of looking at a church for a while and put some information on there. And I don't think we have any other further questions. Feel free to ask anything now, or if there's nothing that springs to mind but you're still interested, we have, once we share the slides and we can share email addresses, you can speak directly to any of our speakers today. So is there anything as well from our group of speakers about experiences?
I would just like to ask Imogen where the community centre is that she's looking at. I'm curious because you've said in the chat you're from Lewisham. Is it in Lewisham as well?
Yeah, it is. I feel I kind of shouldn't say because I mean, yeah, I'm happy to chat with you just because I think there's quite a lot of tension at the moment. But yeah,
It's fair enough. I was wondering if it was a one that I have seen
okay.
go up for sale recently. Or is it up for
Yeah.
sale at the moment or?
No,
No,
we'll
it's not.
definitely be in touch though, Lenny. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go for a coffee. We can chat more.
That's all.
That's great to hear. Right. Well, if there's no further questions, I was wondering if you would all, before you go, I'm happy to just participate in a very short survey. So it's just about today, the session, and for future sessions, how we can shape them. So I'm going to just share my poll. I'll just launch that. Yeah, so you should be able to see that. There's just about 8 questions, but they're all kind of multiple choice. And I will, if I make, I'm going so our co-host can also, if they'd like to fill in, I'll revoke co-host, 'cause it just means that you can't fill it in if you're a host. That's it. I'll leave that up for a few minutes. And while that's going, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today, and particularly for our wonderful speakers, to hear a little bit more about how to set it up, how to support a really good business plan, looking at income stacking. Love that term. Thank you, Matt. And also to actually see behind the scenes of 2 very different models of practice across the country. It was such an honour and privilege. Thank you. But also to our 2 brilliant BSL interpreters, Claire and Naomi, who've stayed with us throughout the afternoon. So the session today will go up probably next week, probably Monday. And so you can then share it, or make sure you have a link, but it's also on our website, which is letscreatepeerlearning.org.uk. And then you can review as well, where we'll also have attached resources as well from today. So that's the slides where they've been shown and contact details. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again sometime soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much.